This is April 15th week. April 15th. We work until April 24th to pay our taxes in the United States. Now, how did we get here? In 1774, we're in Pennsylvania, part of the Revolution. Remember the 13 colonies? 1774, Americans, colonists, were paying 1 to 2% of their income in total taxes. 1 to 2% in total taxes. The British, our oppressors, were paying 20%. They were thinking of going to 3. We brought out the guns and we had a revolution. There's been some backsliding because we're now paying about 30% of our money in federal taxes, federal, state, and local taxes. How did we get there? How did we have an anti-tax country go from 1 to 2 up to 30% in total taxes? Well, in the book, I go through about 13 lies they told us to get us there. You may remember the sad story of New Jersey next door. They had high property taxes. So in 1965, they said, here's the solution. Property taxes are too high. We're going to have a sales tax. They didn't have a sales tax in New Jersey till 1965. So they put in a sales tax. And then 10 years later, they had high property taxes, a high sales tax, and they needed a solution. 1774, remember Byrne? Let's have an income tax. So they added an income tax to the sales tax and the property tax because this was going to reduce the property tax. Now, in New Jersey, they have high sales taxes, high property taxes, and high income taxes. If you have a tapeworm that is annoying, swallowing 2 more tapeworms will not make it smaller. Tapeworms and taxes have a way of growing. My favorite tax, or least favorite tax, is the Spanish-American War tax. One of our challenges is every time we've had a war, even the important and good ones, taxes go up to pay for the war and taxes stay there, except for the War of 1812. That was pretty good. But the others stay there. They stop funding the war. The guys in the government just take that same money and do other things with it. Spanish-American War, they passed a tax. It's the perfect tax. It was a 3% tax on long-distance phone calls. Well, at the time, a phone cost $5,000. Very few people made long-distance phone calls. So it was a tax on the few, a tax on the rich. It was an emergency. It was a war. It was patriotic. It was a war. It was going to be a temporary tax because the Spanish Empire was not exactly a first-class opponent. It wasn't going to last forever. That tax lasted 100 years before it was finally abolished. The longest living veteran of the Spanish-American War was the Spanish-American tax, the federal excise tax on your phones. Okay, we have this conflict going back to 1776. They're the Patriots and the Sons of Liberty. And what we're up against are what they called at the time friends of government. That's what they called the Loyalists, friends of government. You know these people. Some of them are your neighbors. They always side with the government against the American people, and they argue for higher and higher taxes. How do we get from here to there? I think we need to head towards 1 to 2% and away from 30. Can we get rid of the income tax? I think so. We went through most of our country's history without an income tax. 1913, we didn't have an income tax until then. Step 1 was the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which Americans for Tax Reform, my group, shares with all candidates, House, Senate, President. We now have 218 members of the House and 49 in the Senate who've signed the pledge, no tax increase. So if you walk into, and most Republican candidates make that commitment, almost all of them keep it. We had a little problem with your governor recently, but in most states and most times, they keep that. So you can go into the voting booth, and if you vote for the guy with who takes the pledge, he or she will not raise your taxes. They may do other foolish things. They will not raise your taxes. That stopped the growth of taxes. From 1993, when Clinton raised taxes all by himself, only Democrats, no Republican voted for that tax increase, until 2009, when Obama came in with a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate and a Democratic President. During the period in between, there was not a single tax increase put on the American people from Washington, D.C. Since the Republicans took the House, where a majority have taken the pledge, there has not been a tax increase enacted by Congress. Step 1, don't raise taxes. If tax increases are on the table, remember every once in a while they say, let's make a deal. We'll raise taxes a little bit, and we promise to cut spending. Remember what they did with Reagan, 1982? They cheated Reagan. They promised him tax increase, give you a lot of spending cuts. Spending cuts never happened. Then they went to Bush. They promised Reagan 3-to-1 ratio. They went to President Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush. They said, we're going to offer you 2-to-1. You're a cheaper date. I thought, if you're going to cheat somebody, offer them 10-to-1. You're dealing with Confederate money anyway. Why not make him feel good? We're going to have $10 for $1, since you're not seeing any of the 10 anyway. Well, they cheated Bush, too. 2011, the Republican House held, the Republicans in the Senate held. They said we need $2.5 trillion in spending cuts over the next decade, not a dime of tax increase. If you put a tax increase on the negotiating table, it pushes the spending off the table, because everything becomes a tax increase. If you put piranha in your goldfish bowl and come back the next day, there are no goldfish. The only way to get spending cuts is to never allow tax increases to be on the table at all. That's step one. Step two was to remember and learn from the Tea Party movement of 2009. The Tea Party movement changed America. Every once in a while people say, where'd it go? Well, first of all, many of it went to Congress. But its spirit went to Congress, and it said, there's a little love pat they gave the Republican Party with a 2x4 right on the forehead. They said, stop spending so much money. End the earmarks, okay? Earmarks used to be a sign of virility. People would, put in their obituary about how much money they stole from other districts and dragged to their congressional districts. It was a sign of how powerful you were that you got earmarks. Today, somebody talked about earmarks like farting at the dinner table. It's not something anyone's proud of, and it's largely stopped in Washington, D.C. because of the Tea Party. The Tea Party said, yes, don't raise taxes. Good point. 2, stop spending so much money. And putting those two together began to let us make a U-turn on our present road to serfdom. The Tea Party was instrumental in changing the Republican Party so that it was not just against taxes, but that it was against spending too. Next step, in the book I got through about 20, but let me suggest a key one. You get to a single rate tax. That could be a flat tax, it could be a fair tax, but a single rate tax. Why? Because it's fair. Well, taxation is taking money from people who earned it and giving people who didn't necessarily earn it, so fairness is really not the issue here. The reason why a single rate tax is important is that it's very difficult to raise. In Pennsylvania, you have a constitutional requirement, single rate. I grew up in Massachusetts prior to emigrating to the United States. And back in the old country in Massachusetts, they have a constitutional amendment also, single rate tax, 5.25%. Can you imagine in Teddy Kennedy, George McGovern, Massachusetts, if they had a graduated income tax, how high it would be? It'd be California, New York territory. A single rate tax is difficult to raise because when the politicians want to raise your taxes, they have to look at everybody in the room. They say, I've got a really good idea, and you're all paying for it. Well, then we are all listening very hard. You notice the trick that they pull now, which is Obama said only get taxed the top 1%. That lasted 16 days before he promised that, broke that promise. And the guy before him, Clinton, was only going to tax the top 2%. So what they said to people is, I'm going to divide you into little groups. You step into the other room while I deal with this small group here. It's not going to be pleasant. You don't want to really hear it, but it's not you. Okay? This is the Richard Speck theory of tax increases. If you can't take on everyone in the room, you take them out of the room one at a time. The reason we like a flat tax is it doesn't let you take us out of the room one at a time, and we're all safer because of it. It's also easier to cut a flat rate, single rate tax, because everybody gets a tax cut at the same time. There's a movement across the country that will benefit all states, and that is that there are 9 states with no income taxes at all. You know them, Texas, Florida, 9 states. There are another 10 states that are looking to get rid of their income taxes. You saw the governor of Maine announce the other day that, reiterating his goal is to take Maine to a zero income tax state. The model is Kansas. The other team trashes Kansas mercilessly. Why? Because it's the model for success. So expect them to tell you everything's wrong in Kansas. What Kansas did was they said, if revenue goes up more than 2% a year, instead of letting the unions grab it and spend it, and the spending interests grab the additional money and spend it, that money goes to ratchet down permanently the income tax. So as more money comes in, you take that, cut the income tax. And it's a permanent ratchet down. It never ratchets up. In 10 to 15 years, Kansas will have 0 personal income tax. Then they will ratchet down the corporate income tax. North Carolina has already begun this process, taking the tax rate down to 3% with that ratchet. They're looking to do this in Arizona. They passed a law through the House in Mississippi to do just this. They got to get the House, Senate to go along. But this model of taking additional revenue from growth and phasing out the income tax, not spending it on more goodies, but phasing it out, is what will take us from 9 states with no income taxes to 20 to 25 over the next 15, 20 years. And when we look around, we got half the states now, 25 states have right-to-work laws. Makes it a lot easier to see those spreading faster. So when we have 25 states that don't have an income tax, I think it's going to be easier to say, you know, maybe we don't need a federal income tax. That may not be necessary at all. And that's when we will continue this effort at the national level. The Ryan budget plan, getting to the spending issue, takes all of our entitlements and begins to bend the cost curve down. It block grants welfare, means-tested welfare programs, out to the states. When we did that with aid to families with dependent children, 185 different welfare programs at the national level. The one we called welfare was aid to families with dependent children. It was one of 185, one of the bigger ones, but it was one of many. Block grant those to the states. Let states compete to provide the best government at the lowest cost, and to compete for people to move to those states and resources to move to those states. That healthy competition means New York and California will have to reform because other states are reforming. And the same thing's true about Pennsylvania and Massachusetts and even Vermont. Although, look, no one's life is a complete waste. Some people serve as bad examples. I recommend Vermont because it's small. There's no reason to really continue to do it to some of the larger states. Can we, if we pass the Ryan budget plan, reforms Medicare and other entitlements, instead of the 20% of GDP right now absorbed by the federal government, going up to 40, that's the present plan, without any new law passed, just as we get older and all of those entitlements grow. This takes it 20 down to 16 over the next 30, 40 years. Cuts it in half. The Ryan budget plan, one bill, 51 votes, reconciliation in the Senate, majority in the House, and a president with enough digits to sign the bill. That's why 216 is so important. It is how and where we can do a U-turn on our present road to serfdom and head not backwards, but forwards to where we started, where we took the Constitution seriously, where you could count how many crimes there were in the country and how many taxes you had imposed on people. We didn't get here overnight with big government. Half of the federal government came in 4 years of American history. After a series of landslides, the Democrats won, going into 34 to 36. They passed a series of entitlements. And then 64 to 66 after Democrat landslides. 10% of GDP is consumed by government programs passed in those 4 years, those two-year periods. We can do the same thing back by reforming government down. That's how we're going to turn this around. That's how we win. Let me end by telling you the bad news in the book, and that is the 2012 election was stolen, not necessarily at the ballot box, but by the IRS. Because the IRS got their orders from Obama, and they were told, we're scared of the Tea Party. We see 1 million people in the streets and 1,000 rallies. And the order went down, don't let them incorporate, don't let them set up 501c3s and C4s so that they can grow, and so that all 50 states would have a state Tea Party group as well. And what happened is, there's a great study the American Enterprise Institute did that showed that the Tea Party rallies themselves, where they took place, drove Republican turnout in the 2010 election up by 3.2 to to 5.8 million votes. That didn't happen in 12. The Tea Party was pushed down the stairs by the IRS, taking sides, and our job, great 7 wonderful bills passed the House this week to make crimes of, and there I would lock away people and throw away the key, of the IRS going after our personal data and going after us for violating the law. We're going to win, and the measure of when we win is when all 50 states can have a meeting like this, like the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, as big and as determined. We need this not just in this state. I've been coming since '89. This is wonderful. We need all 57 states to have one just as good. Thank you.